Welcome to Stop, Look, and Listen Volume 2. This new video, along with Stop, Look, and Listen Volume 1, is part of a continuing education program developed by the Standards Committee of the Train Collectors Association for their roster of over 28,000 members worldwide, as well as all collectors and operators who are interested in learning about the frauds and reproductions that have invaded our hobby. Since the introduction of Volume 1, we've had several requests about which new reproduction items to include. Volume 1 covered reproductions of 3 of the more valuable post-war Lionel diesels: the Jersey Central, the Sears C&O, and the orange-striped Milwaukee Road. In each example, specific clues and indicators regarding originality were given.
Viewer requests to include repainted F3s in our next video have been overwhelming, so that's where we'll begin. However, we've decided to approach the F3s from a different angle. Why? Because 2 excellent products on the subject have already been produced. For instance, the most informative video produced on Lionel's post-war F3s was done by Mountain Lakes Productions, with narration provided by post-war experts Donald Shaw, David Shaw, and Doug Waller. Produced in 1990, the video is not only informative, it's extremely entertaining.
Not to be outdone, Volume 1 of the Toy Train Reference Series by Greenberg Books is about Lionel's post-war F3s. This book is well written, colorful, and very informative.
Viewers have commented that even though much has been published on repainted F3s, they still have a hard time determining if an F3 is heat stamped, rubber stamped, or silk screened. It makes no difference whether the F3 is original or a repaint, they still can't tell.
We're focusing on the double-motored F3s made by Lionel from 1955 to 1957. These F3s have become the most valuable, are the most often repainted, and more importantly, share many of the same features. Included are the 2363 Illinois Central and 2367 Wabash from 1955, the 2368 Baltimore and Ohio and 2378 Milwaukee Road from 1956, and the 2373 Canadian Pacific and 2379 Rio Grande from 1957.
1955 to 1957 is also a great place to zero in because many of the early custom painters purchased used double-motored Santa Fe's at train shows and other outlets for their work. Back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Santa Fe's were not only readily available, they were also inexpensive.
What makes this observation important is that Lionel modified the F3 shell starting in 1955, as the side windows were filled in and became part of the casting. Before 1955, the side windows were open. This change is easy to identify. However, with new collectors entering the hobby during the middle 1970s, the asking price of used Santa Fe's began to climb, making them less attractive. The custom painters had to look elsewhere, but they didn't have to look very long.
Custom painters began using F3 shells made after 1969 when Lionel leased the train division to Model Products Corporation, or MPC, which was a division of General Mills. These shells were made for MPC's production of F3s like the 8363 Baltimore and Ohio, 8365 Canadian Pacific, and 8464 Rio Grande, just to name a few. The MPC shells are easy to recognize because the side vents were removed from the design. All the post-war shells had the side vents as part of their design.
This 2367 Wabash has the molded side vents and is original. Since the side vents are missing on this 2367 Wabash, it's easy to spot as a repaint. Also, in this instance, the custom painter left his calling card. The inside is clearly marked with his name, phone number, a reproduction R, and a TCA restoration sticker. So remember, any post-war Lionel F3 without a side vent is a repaint.
Our final clues are offered just in case blank original post-war shells were used or badly damaged originals were stripped and repainted.
As Lionel prepared for the 1955 production of F3s, a small nick developed on the mold. When the F3 shell was made, this nick caused a tiny imperfection on the roof. Each of the original post-war Lionel F3s, made from 1955 to 1957, will have this imperfection. It makes no difference if the roof of the original shell was bare plastic, like this 2378 Milwaukee Road, or painted, like this 2373 Canadian Pacific. They all have the nick.
For 1958's production of F3s, Lionel removed the imperfection from the roof by polishing the mold. In fact, if you look closely at an original New Haven or a 1960s gray plastic shell, the outline of the repair work is visible. Lionel also removed the door handle from the F3's design in 1958. It was done to accommodate the lettering on the nose of the 2242 New Haven.
All of the F3 shells up to this time had the molded door handles. Some, like this 2333 New York Central from 1948, are easy to spot. Others, like this 2367 Wabash, are harder to recognize because the handle is hidden by its decal. Closer inspection shows the decal is cracked where it covers the handle.
All the F3s from 1948 to 1957 had the door handle. However, there's one more point to be made.
At first glance, the striping appears to have covered the door handle and also the side vents on this beautifully painted Baltimore and Ohio. However, the door handle and side vents are visible on this Baltimore and Ohio, which is 100% original. So what's the difference? The original was rubber stamped as the striping rests on top of the highest point of the design. This beautiful repaint used a decal, which isn't original Lionel, but easier for the custom painter to apply. However, closer inspection will reveal the repaint wasn't covering up the door handle or side vent after all.
We hope the clues helped, and if you're planning to add all the F3s to your collection, the Mountain Lakes video, which has a special offer at the end of our video, or the Greenberg book, are great investments.
Requests for information on reproduction space and military trains almost equal the F3s. Collector interest has grown considerably, which may explain why Greenberg's next Collector Series book is about space and military. These trains were made to be played with and often have broken or missing parts, such as a broken tail section on a 3419 helicopter or 3619 reconnaissance copter. It's not uncommon for the entire load to be missing, which is the main reason the reproductions began to appear during the late 1980s. Sometimes the reproductions were marked with the letter R, but most often they were not. The ones making the reproduction did make some changes, but the letter R would have saved many collectors from losing money. We believe the following example will explain this problem quite effectively.
This summer I was at a train show. I purchased the 6407, thinking it was completely original. The guy told me he'd bought it at an auction. It looked weathered. I believed him. Fortunately enough, I know Joe Algozzini. I took it over to him. I showed it to him. Immediately told me, look under the cap. It's a pencil sharpener. This is not an original piece. I got my money back.
This is a major problem facing collectors. As the years go by, reproductions began to show their signs of wear and can fool even a seasoned veteran. But to properly evaluate these items, we must start at the beginning. During 1959 and 1960, Lionel attempted to gain the largest possible share of the toy train space and military market by aggressively advertising their operating helicopter cars. 1959 feature articles in Life and Look magazine highlighted real-life personalities such as Chuck Connors, who starred on TV as the Rifleman. For the 1960 holiday season, Lionel captivated their audience by bringing their trains to life in a TV feature entitled The Wonderful World of Trains. But it was the helicopter cars that put Lionel in front of the pack. And whether they were double or single blade beauties, the helicopter cars set the stage for all the other space and military products that followed.
Lionel probably made over 100,000 helicopter cars in one form or another, so it's not hard to understand why they became prime targets for reproduction. The first company to aggressively manufacture space and military reproductions was Parts for Collectors. One of the earliest parts made was the helicopter tail section as advertised in this October 1986 listing. Since flat cars without their original loads were offered for sale at train shows and hobby shops everywhere, it's understandable why a complete reproduction helicopter soon followed in 1988.
The Navy helicopter was the first to be reproduced. Although it didn't have the letter R on the bottom of the fuselage, the word Navy was printed in black ink instead of blue as on an original. Also, the tail section, regardless of color, was missing the Built by Lionel.
Shortly after the release of the Navy, the second reproduction by Parts for Collectors hit the market. It was the USMC, which, when original, is the most valuable of all the helicopters made by Lionel. This reproduction followed the same format established by the Navy. The word USMC was printed in blue ink instead of black, as on an original, and the tail section was missing the Built by Lionel. To protect collectors even further, the letter R was added to the bottom of the fuselage. By marking their reproductions, it appeared the manufacturer was taking the steps necessary to protect the collector and the hobby. As a thank you, both helicopters were featured in our April 1989 issue of the Train Collectors Quarterly. That article was entitled Stop, Look, and Listen, Part 1. However, the thank you was short-lived.
The reproduction USMC began to appear without the R. Whether these were from the first production run or a second is not known. What is known is all the reproduction loads from this moment on would be made without an R. However, the good news is the reproductions can still be identified.
The reproduction skid has 6 ejector pin marks. Originals do not. The reproduction nose has a flatter front surface. Originals are rounded. The reproduction single blades have an indented mold mark on the support, which is more defined than on an original. The reproduction double blades are much more pliable than an original. However, we don't recommend doing the same with an original. On the reproduction, the ridge below the retaining washer is noticeably shallower than an original. This is the key element in detecting reproductions made by Parts for Collectors.
Lionel's helicopters were fashioned after those used by the armed forces to bring in supplies or to airlift the wounded to safety. Lionel even claimed their products, like the operating submarines, were replicas of the real thing. It's been said that Lionel was ahead of their time, so with the introduction of the 6820 in 1960, the product takes on a whole new meaning. The 6820 transported 2 missiles used for aerial bombing. Die-hard Lionel enthusiasts may even like to imagine that future aircraft like the AH-1 Cobra gunship used during the Vietnam era was fashioned after the 6820.
The 6820 included a tapered hole on the bottom of the fuselage that held in place the missile rack that carried 2 plastic missiles with red plastic afterburners. The original missile rack had a depressed area on the part. The reproduction did not. The original afterburners had a small opening at the end of the part. The repros, made in red or yellow plastic, did not.
An original USMC helicopter was made after the 6820, so it has the tapered hole. The reproductions omitted the hole, although some unscrupulous individual could always attempt to duplicate the procedure.
The helicopter for the 3619, introduced in 1962, and 0319 in 1960, have also been reproduced by Parts for Collectors, although the company name had changed to Chicago Line Toy Company.
Even though the reproduction is unmarked, it's easy to distinguish from an original. Besides being cast in a lighter red plastic, the repro has 2 portholes on the side that are filled in. An original only has 1 porthole. which is open, and an extra side window. The reproduction helicopter was actually copied from the same copter used by Hornby Hobbies of Margate, England. Although Hornby's is molded in yellow plastic, the features are the same. The reproduction by Parts for Collectors caused no serious damage to the hobby. However, sometimes what appears to be a good thing doesn't last too long.
Shortly after the Parts for Collectors helicopter, another repro was offered for sale, but this version was promoted as a much better reproduction because it had the same features as the original, namely the see-through porthole and the extra side window. Although both reproductions are missing the Built by Lionel in the tail section, this offers no help because the Lionel originals were made both ways.
Lionel's helicopter just offers better workmanship than the second reproduction. For instance, the original tail section, especially the propellers, are much fuller, and it's noticeably longer. The missile and capsule used for Lionel's 6407 was made by Sterling Products of Union, New Jersey. Sterling made school supplies that doubled as pencil sharpeners, like this 504 novelty assortment, or more importantly, this 529 astronaut pencil case from 1962. The reproductions, made by Model Train Sales, Inc., are easy to distinguish from an original.
The original Lionel missile has the Sterling name, logo, number 529, made in USA, and patent applied for, stamped near the bottom. The reproduction only has the number 529 stamped. The Lionel capsule has the same Sterling data, except the number is 506. The reproduction is blank. The repro is usually missing a pencil sharpener, as did most, if not all, the Lionel originals.
At first glance, this olive drab plastic 6464-475 Boston and Maine boxcar may appear to be the perfect companion piece for Lionel space and military trains. However, looks can be deceiving. In this example, the culprit was sunlight, although the sun isn't totally at fault for some of the concoctions that have been showing up lately.
This red plastic helicopter appears to be a rare variation, one that could be used interchangeably with the original yellow helicopter used with the 419 heliport or the operating helicopter cars. It has all the original features. It has an original skid, nose and blade, but more importantly, it has Built by Lionel on the tail section in raised lettering. This helicopter caused some commotion among post-war collectors at the Great American Train Show in Chicago a few years ago. However, it's not original post-war Lionel.
After some lengthy detective work, it was determined that the so-called rare find was nothing more than a kit-bashed example from the Fundimensions 1981 laser train. All that was needed was to change the skid, nose, and blade, and then finally break the tail section to show the copter was used.
This problem could have been avoided if Fundimensions had removed the Built by Lionel from the tail section and replaced it with their own logo. Of course, our color of plastics problem doesn't end with Fundimensions. It continues through to the present day. In fact, there are hundreds of kit-bashed items for sale.
It's difficult to lay all the blame on the manufacturers of new Lionel, as they continue to bring back items made by the original Lionel Corporation. Their main objective is to make a profit, and with the high cost of making any product, competition also has to be considered.
What new Lionel has failed to realize is that many collectors buy both new and old Lionel trains, and collectors can be finicky. Parts that are not marked can be used to repair or replace original ones, and once fooled, collectors might stop buying new and old Lionel altogether. When this happens, the dollars spent are on MTH and other manufacturers. This is not goodwill.
The 18417 gang car uses a yellow plastic motor cover and black plastic brush holder. The original Lionel gang car did not. There's no problem here. The TV camera and reflector stand for the 16704 are also a different color than the original. Again, no problem. The parts for the 8578 ballast tamper are a different color than the original. The only problem would be the antenna. Maybe new Lionel could have used a different size or shape.
The seat for the 8379 fire car is cream. The original was white. However, the seat for the 16726 is white, and the lens is the same color red as used with the 3512. The generator is light gray. The original was a darker gray. However, the generator for the reissued 3650 is also darker gray. The problem starts to become clear.
The platform and platform base for the reissued 16620 and 16708 are the same colors as the originals. The reflectors for the reissued 12723 microwave tower are also white plastic like the original. The key parts for an original Lionel 192 and 197 can be found with the reissued products.
The searchlight housing for these searchlight cars made by new Lionel came from the same mold as the original. Inspection shows the reissued part has the same part number and Lionel name as the last original made in 1969. However, for some unknown reason, the reissued part had the Lionel L removed from the same part. In fact, if you look real close, the impression from the modification is present. If this change can be made, why not the others?
This 6469 is advertised as an authentic licensed reproduction of an original nameplate, decal, or transfer. However, in no way is it original Lionel, or even new Lionel for that matter. Why would new Lionel license this product in the first place, other than to make money? If they realized that collectors would get burned, would this product have been licensed?
Until something is done to protect both the collector and the hobby, there's one thing to be learned from this discussion. Like we said in part 1, if the color hasn't been reported to the Greenberg guides by now, it probably isn't original. Reproduction doors for the 6464 boxcar series have been made. They're easy to distinguish from the originals. The reproductions have 4 ejector marks on the inside of the door. The originals do not.
When it comes to deceiving collectors, nothing can compare to the scam involving chemically altered cars. These cars did their damage during the late 1970s and into the early 1980s. Everything was fair game, from boxcars to cabooses to diesel power. The scam was to change the color of a common car to a color that was rare or one of a kind. The white painted 6356 New York Central and 6464-725 New Haven were among the first to appear. The common versions were painted yellow and orange, respectively. But the scam artists didn't stop here. They began to change the lettering from yellow to white and from white to yellow. At first, the scam looked invincible, but all bad things have to come to an end. TM's Volume 5, introduced October 1981, incorrectly identified some of these cars as Lionel prototypes or paint samples. Joe Algozzini explains.
TM's volume showed some of the same one-of-a-kinds that I owned. This bothered me, so I began to question my supplier. Naturally, I was offered very little from that moment on. The next year, I only bought a few items, but still had some doubt in the back of my mind. Why were many of these rare cars easy and inexpensive to find when they were the common versions? Something just wasn't right.
In 1983, the scam would finally be exposed for what it was and fall completely apart, never to return. The following will explain how this came about. During early 1983, 6464 boxcar collector Wade Soddy placed an ad in TCA's National Headquarter News. He wanted to make a complete listing of 6464 boxcars and was asking collectors for help. One collector who offered to help was Joe Algozzini. In fact, Joe and his buddy Mel Nicholas took a trip to the East Coast in March that ended at Wade's house.
Wade took Mel and me into his train room and began to show us his 6464 boxcar collection. I couldn't believe my eyes. Wade had some of the same rare one-of-a-kind boxcars that I did. But more importantly, we both bought them from the same individual. However, we kept our little secret to ourselves.
A few weeks later, at the April 1983 Eastern Division TCA meet in York, Pennsylvania, Charlie Axe was setting up before the meet officially started. Charlie had stumbled across something very suspicious: chemically altered MPC cars. Charlie made some fake cars and set up a display to warn collectors. Unfortunately for Charlie, he was asked to take down his display. Fortunately for collectors, his table was directly across from Joe Algozzini. After comparing notes and before the meet even got started, Charlie and Joe knew the chemically altered post-war and MPC cars came from the same individual. What's unbelievable is with over 10,000 members attending the meet, what are the chances of Charlie and Joe's tables being across from one another?
I was finally convinced the cars were fake, but I felt I needed more evidence.
Joe started a coast-to-coast telephone campaign and contacted many of the more well-known post-war collectors. Joe learned that some of the collectors had the same rare one-of-a-kind cars as he did, of course, from the same supplier. Joe learned of the Heinz pickle car during this time, and that information was covered in our first Stop, Look, and Listen video.
However, the best was yet to come. October 1983 was the date. The cover was blown sky high in an article entitled, "Look Who's Picking Your Pocket Now." The fake white operating barrel car, which has become the symbol for all the chemically altered cars, was covered in this two-page article. The publisher? Naturally, it was TCA.
TCA established a fraud committee, and the rare cars disappeared from the meets. However, there were still plenty of non-TCA meets to consider. In September 1984, Joe sent out letters to the collectors he had called earlier and asked them to attend a special meeting at the October 1984 York meet. The response was positive, and with TCA editor Bruce Manson presiding, the outcome of that meeting was to warn collectors from coast to coast. The chemically altered cars were history. Sometimes the best advice we can give about reproductions, repaints, or frauds is to know the individual you're buying from. If he's reputable, he will stand behind his product. If not, you should avoid him like the plague.
At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Bob. He has a presentation he'd like to make.
Thank you, Gary. For the last couple of years, I have had the honor of being chairman of the Train Collectors Association Standards Committee. And the committee has done an awful lot of work to revise our standards, revise our procedures, and is doing an excellent job. One of the facets that we went into last year was the production of a videotape called Stop, Look, and Listen, authored by Joe Algozzini, that's been distributed to the divisions, and it's available here at the business office. This was a venture that we went out on to educate our members about toy trains and the fakes and frauds, and to help promote and at the same time protect the hobby. The Standards Committee members do a fantastic job quietly for everybody in the association. The association has stood behind us 100%. This tape was a venture that was a trial to see how it would work. It's worked so well that We not only covered our budget, but it's being offered for sale to the public through Varda Productions and Joe Algozzini, of which TCA is to receive a rebate. And I'm happy to present back to the association a check for $1,331 as our rebate money on that tape. While this money is substantial, I think it's more symbolic of the work of the Standards Committee, the support that the members have, and even more than that, the support that we have received from the officers and directors of TCA in promoting TCA standards and putting our policies in place. So Bob, I'm happy to return to you some of your money, $1,331.